We are, that's a little loud. We're group number 2. We talked about, specifically, had a really good focused discussion on W3C process and how we could do things. Here are a few notes, sort of broken down into thematics. I haven't had time to break them all in thematically, but not by, rather than by the order in which we talked about them. We did talk about functionality of other systems that might be useful and experience that people have with those. We also talked about the application of annotations as a new layer. The two different ways of using annotations as a new layer of annotation, but also as a facilitator of a new process. We talked about karma, and we specifically broke that down into the idea that karma and authority, you might have reputation versus karma. So karma is how somebody's behaving in the community, and reputation is how they are. Is how authoritative they are in a particular area. And we also talked about the idea of a system that might let you categorize where somebody's an expert, and as their karma, and as they go further away from their area of expertise, their relative karma goes down. We talked about, I explained a little bit about W3C's process and structure, and we talked about the idea of public versus working group comments, and the ability that each of the players there had. We also talked about what I'm calling belt and garters. We're migrating from an email-based system to an annotation-based system. Some people might not want to do that migration. They may prefer to do email, and it is still experimental. So what we're going to do is we're going to still allow people to comment via email. And in fact, when somebody leaves an email, it's going to send, when somebody leaves an annotation, it's going to send an email to a mailing list. So it's sort of a notification system. And then speaking of notification systems, somebody had the idea for the ability to basically watch a section of a spec, so that if they were interested in that section of the spec and they wanted to make sure that it went in the right direction, they wanted to be notified of changes, they wanted to be notified of comments that came in there, they could say, I want to watch that, and that a watch is actually just a special kind of annotation that we apply to a section of text. But that's not treated as an annotation, as a visible annotation. We talked about how we're going to filter out the signal and noise, and when something is no longer a relevant comment because the section has been moved or changed or removed, or the issue has been resolved, how we can filter those out. And I described an idea that we have for actually making the annotation system itself an issue tracking system through the use of tags. So use the ontology that issue tracking systems have, like accepted, won't fix, resolved, etc., and then using filters to remove the resolved issues so that they're not so they're no longer visible. Let's see. We talked about, in light of that, how one annotation might actually branch out into multiple issues, and we talked about how, because annotations already can split up documents, that's an annotation on an annotation could be the way we split out those documents. And also maybe multiple people raised the same issue, and so how, just like with an issue tracker, how we could add a link to an issue and say, we're handling this in this other thread over here. Let's see. We talked about how we're going to be getting annotations from 3 different sources on the documentation, on the technical specification itself, and somebody can leave an annotation on our documentation, and it might find its way onto the specification as a change change request. Let's see, and also similarly with testing. Dan raised the issue of getting annotations from other servers and communities. I thought that was a really interesting idea. We're going to have our own annotation repo, but we might want to watch other communities and have other annotations be able to be visible on our, and pay attention to other issues that come in. And then finally, we talked about, since this is an experiment, how are we going to make it a successful and growing experiment? And so we thought about, what I plan on doing is forming a community group, a W3C community group about this, where we can write up user stories on our existing process and evaluate how well annotations solve particular user stories and things like that, and then also collect feedback on the annotation system itself. So if any of you are interested in this topic, we are going to be forming a community group about using this for W3C process. And that's me. Thank you very much, by the way, for all the people who came to my table. I was overwhelmed with the awesome, great feedback. Thank you.
Group 3. Somehow I got elected to do this again. I'm going to keep it relatively short. We were talking about video and annotating specifically videos. I think we ended up talking a little bit about open source tools for this and the idea of annotating video with video through linking. All these things are really well supported, though the current state of technology is pretty much tied to the time code. So in the annotations and in your database layer, how important it is to store maybe actual real time in the world as well as the time code so that you can map between them. So if you're talking about scientific data that's been compressed 100 years into an animation of 10 minutes, you can search by either the year, decade you want or the actual time code. And how for video editing, there are a lot of tools out there that exist because people editing need to basically redline for their darkroom cuts and things like that. The thing that I think was the most interesting was toward the end deciding that social graphs, the annotation time, the time of viewing, the location of the annotation, and the location of the viewer become absolutely wonderful ways to filter the results you show. Now the danger of that is a little bit like Google, that if you're using the same browser, you're not going to get the results that you might want to find, but as more and more annotations get added to any sort of document, these sort of filtering means become really important, maybe even in the scientific community for papers, using the social graph to show you the most relevant results, as long as you can turn off those filters and see the whole thing.
Hello. We talked about ebooks, which is a big topic, and then it got into like copyright and privacy and a whole bunch of other things that were big topics. So I'll just share some of the highlights or things that came up. I think one of the first things we talked about was how would we, with books on the web, and especially with books with annotations and social engagement, how do we deal with offline? This is a big, maybe not in the Bay Area or in other places in America, in the Western world, but in other places, internet access is not so good. How would we possibly sync annotations made offline, etc. We didn't talk too long about that. Well, we did. It's a complicated issue. But additionally, there could be many reading apps that again are based on web standards, are powered by the browser, and they could handle offline storage and also the syncing and non-syncing of annotations. So let's say there's a reading application in the hypothetical future that could be built maybe for this specific use case in education that might allow class notes to sync offline. Another thing we talked about was DRM, which mostly we agreed just kind of sucks. Actually, it doesn't really work. Philippe had this really good statement of the problem, though. I think we want systems that control access because information often costs a lot of money to make. But we don't want systems that control usage, that hinder interoperability, or that serve to support certain vendors' lock-in principles that are bad for publishers and innovation. We don't want things that limit the usage of people who are legitimate customers who might want to read their books in another application besides the crappy Kindle one with its horrible annotation interface. That was a little bit direct, but we.
Don't worry, you're not on the live stream.
Okay, cool, sweet. Sorry. Then we talked. a bit about accessibility and offline stuff. A big topic that came up with was privacy of these notes. Like how do we, this, and then this got into other legal issues, which was a fascinating discussion, and I think it's something we seriously need to explore, is when you have paid content and you have these ideas of books as a community where, what are the terms by which, publishers have a right to sort of use reader contributed content? Are there going to be shrink wrap licenses where, by accepting these terms, you agree that we own all of your annotations? And this, there were a lot of talks around this. I think these are important issues, and obviously something we should weigh in much more. Along with privacy is people's control over their data, things that they offer. How can we sort of mitigate all the different tensions that there are between the various stakeholders? It was a big theme. And then in the end, we had a suggestion around crazy ideas where I talked about, well, actually, we need to think sort of about a lot of new economic models. I think one of the exciting things about annotations is that they can allow a space for community, a space for people to attach documents, to interact, to actually add value to the text, to attach things it's a space to discuss. Books as a place, as Bob Stein was talking about earlier. And with that, I propose that maybe if someone makes a particularly good post, they can sort of be rewarded for that. We need to, I think, as we go on, we need to work on better monetizing certain aspects of where users actually contribute something, whether it's their information or they add a great post that gets tons of upvotes and is really insightful and adds a lot of value to that ebook community. So we agree that there's a lot of new thinking and a lot of exciting things for ebooks, and we're also big fans of open annotation and books in the browser. Yay. Thanks.
Next group. Well, this will be brief. The group on annotating religious texts was 2 one-on-one discussions. And the first one was about how working with languages is hard. And we concluded, yes, it is. You should use Unicode. And if you want morphology, Perseus has pretty good tools for Latin and Attic Greek. The second was about Tim McCormick's idea about wouldn't it be cool if you tweeted out a Bible verse and got the whole thing out there, and maybe that would lead to some interesting results. And he might be right. Thanks. Last group.
All right, so we hit a bunch of stuff, but we talked about how do we, the idea that one of the accessibility is building accessibility into web applications for a lot of developers is hard because it's not something they know about, and the importance of trying to build accessibility into some of the common frameworks like Annotator, and that now is good timing with Annotator 2.0 where you can have different types of interfaces and so forth. We talked about that it's hard to account for all the different types of disabilities, so people that have issues with fine motor control, trying to imagine them adding an annotation on a small screen. We talked about the differentiating between creating annotations and consuming annotations from a accessibility standpoint, and the fact that creating them was as important as being able to consume them, because a lot of people with disabilities want to create annotations so they don't have to go and struggle through, if they're dyslexic, struggle through the text again, or struggle through bad text-to-speech to hear it again. And to that end, we talked about the ability to create multimedia annotations. So I might actually create a video annotation on a piece of text where I'm videoing myself making an annotation. And then that started to get into that accessibility can be a motivator for annotation, particularly when people request an annotation saying, I need someone to describe this image for me. And so then we kind of launched into the topic of what motivates people to do annotation and what are other types of motivations. And we talked about gamification implications. Can we use gamification? And then that led into talking a little about Stack Overflow and the ability to essentially create into the annotation layer of the web the ability for people to query annotation requests by subject area. So you might want to create people can create a site where they're going to aggregate all the annotation requests that are accessibility related, and another site where they're aggregating all the requests for legal explanation. So someone might be looking at a piece of legal text, is confused about what something means, the legalese means, and they can request an annotation, and then someone with an actual law degree would go and explain it further, which then got into the topic of reputation. How do you know that the person that's writing the annotation is actually a lawyer or a subject matter expert? So reputation led to talk about universal identity, and then the ability to, once you have a universal identity, to have it be tied to your reputation, or you can be classified. How can we involve professional communities such as, let's say, IEEE to know that you really do have an engineering background, or the American Bar Association, so that we know that you truly are a lawyer in good standing. And then finally, we talked about the need for annotation in multiple languages, that if you're a non-English speaker here in the U.S., that's almost like a type of disability in itself, or is a disability in a way. And so annotation can be a way to help with actually getting local content that's localized to you. And that also tied into search and discovery, because people are going to want to be able to search in multiple languages. That's it.